monster sets and mythic items for the Flames of Ambition patch. I'm going to go over everything that's got any kind of use for a tank, basically. I'll go through all the monster sets and the mythics, have a quick explanation of when and where and why you might use it, and kind of just make an assessment at the end of what are the most valuable ones. So we'll just go to the first one. So the first useful monster set is definitely Bloodspawn. Easy to obtain for like a first monster set. It builds ultimate. So let's say you're in a situation where you don't need any certain monster set. You want a set that's going to build ultimate faster. You're going to use Bloodspawn for the ulti gain. You won't use it for the resistance buff, and that's because it's an unreliable resistance buff. But you will use it for that burst of ultimate now and again. And this is kind of a good option for ulti building if you need it. Earth Gore is the next one. So the situation where you use Earth Gore is you're in group content where you've got a lack of healing. So either by the healers or you're not very good at healing yourself. It's also quite good for Cloudrest portals, but this monster set is one that you use in those situations. So you're a newer player and you kind of you're struggling to stay alive, you would use Earth Gore to kind of counterbalance that. So before you go away and use a 5-piece gear set, before you use a 5-piece gear set to heal yourself, something like leeching, before you do that kind of thing, try Earth Gore first and see if that helps, and then move on to the 5-piece set if it doesn't. So if you want a good healing monster set for a tank, Earth Gore is the one that you're going to choose. It's better than most of the other monster sets for tanking. This will do a good burst heal. So nearly 30k healing every 20 seconds. Over 10 seconds. So it's there, it's active for 10 seconds, and it's inactive for 10 seconds, and then it can proc again. So it's a very good choice for a tank, because that is a lot of healing to do. Even though it's spread out over a couple of seconds, it's the best one. There is no better healing monster set when it comes to tanking. Encratis' Behemoth monster set. Some people seem to think this is for a damage dealer. Let me tell you now, it is definitely not a damage dealer set. So you have to cause fire damage to the enemy. It procs, it's a group buff set. So it increases the flame damage taken by 5%, increases flame damage reduction by 5% as well. So it reduces your incoming damage by 5% to fire damage. Some people have mentioned this going on a DK damage dealer. The reason you wouldn't do that is because, let's say you're a DK and you usually use Zarn. Well, Zarn would be buffed by 5%. The damage would get buffed by 5% because that is flame damage. So instead of using this on a DD, you're going to use a damage monster set that could be buffed by having this in group as well. So if you're on a DK, you're actually going to lose quite a lot of damage by wearing this. So you definitely want to put it on a tank. In some situations, you're definitely going to use it on a healer. So there are occasions where the tanks have to move away or they're out of group and things. So it would be better on a healer. There are also some situations where you might want it on both tanks. And there's other situations where it's better on the off tank. So it's definitely worth picking up if you are a support, because this is a group support set. It's a group buff set. Group buff sets always go on support rolls. They don't go on damage dealers. And that's because damage dealers wear damage-based gear that improve their damage. And that is kind of it. And then the support rolls use gear that buffs the group's damage. So that's why this goes on the supports. And it goes on the tank because the tank's always right next to the boss. And the healer isn't always near the boss. So that's kind of why you'd put that on the tank. You proc it with flame damage. That can be a flame glyph on an infused weapon. You could use a fire staff on your bat bar. You could use a flame ability, something like engulfing flames, or even scalding rune from the Mages Guild, like something that causes fire damage. You put it on the boss, you put it on the enemy, and it'll proc the set. And it'll proc it on cooldown as long as you've got like a consistent incoming fire damage applied. So there you go. The next one is Engine Guardian. So we've had, if you need a heal, that you go to Earth Gore. If you want a group buff set, you go to Encratis' Behemoth. If you need a sustain monster set, this is where Engine Guardian comes into the mix. So if you need a sustain monster set, this is the one that you will use. Quite easy to obtain. Again, this comes from Darkshade 2. Quite an easy dungeon, not too difficult. And this is the best sustain monster set. So it just provides so much resources all the time. Like, it's always active. It's always there. Always giving you resources. It's the only one to really use. It's the only worthwhile monster set to use for sustain. So this is your sustain option. Obviously, use this and try this before you ever equip a 5-piece sustain set, because you want to try doing this first. Using 5-piece sustain sets is the worst case scenario. So if you can't sustain whatsoever, you have heavy attack, you're using potions, you're using the Engine Guardian, you still can't sustain, that's when you use a 5-piece. But you want to use this. This is a good sustain set, great sustain set. First point of call if you need more sustain. We're not going to really talk about Grundwolf. It's not really worth using Grundwolf. Grundwolf is another sustain set that will give you stamina and magicka. So it's kind of good. But you need to cause crit damage. It won't be as active as Engine Guardian. And it won't give you as many resources back as Engine Guardian. But like, if you can do Moongrave Fane on Vet, and you want to guarantee the option of getting stamina and magicka back, and you don't want to risk getting health back, or getting magicka back when you need stamina, and you always want to get stamina back every time it procs, and a little bit of magicka every time it procs, then obviously Grundwolf is definitely an option in terms of a little bit of consistency. And where you just want to guarantee that you get a certain resource back, but it won't give you as many resources back as Engine Guardian. And with Engine Guardian, you can balance to get, like, if you're getting health, if you're getting the health beam from Engine Guardian, you can balance to convert it into magicka, and if you want a DK, you can ignite your shield to convert that magicka into stamina. Obviously with Grundwolf, you're just going to guarantee to get stamina, so you won't need to do any of the converting and messing around. So it's an option, but the problem is Moongrave Fane is quite a tricky dungeon, and a lot of people won't be able to do that on Vet. So Engine Guardian is way more accessible. Grundwolf requires you to do crit damage, and that is going to be a little bit of a struggle. Like, it is not as easy to crit on a tank as other classes. So you might find it doesn't proc as often as you want because you're struggling to get an actual crit hit. What else have we got? Ladythorne. So this is a good monster set for ad pulls. In an ad pull, you'd ideally want one tank with the Encratis' Behemoth monster set, the other tank with Ladythorne. So Ladythorne debuffs enemies, and it's an AoE debuff, 360 degrees, and it's quite a big radius. So it's kind of worth having for ad pulls, especially in some of the harder content, like trials with lots of hard-hitting ads, Kind's Aegis and Sunspire. You go into an ad pack, you use Alkosh as well in the ad packs, and you use Ladythorne as well. So you can kind of 2 for 1. You use Ladythorne that gives you the Synergy, which gives you your Alkosh, and you can kind of proc them both together, and that works really nicely. It's not really needed for like main tanking. Your main tank nowadays would either use Encratis in a Magicka group or Tremor Scale in a Stamina group, and then this is kind of like, if you're in a real like heavy progression where like everyone's completing a trial for the first time, you might use it in certain trials and certain mechanics. So let's say in Asylum Sanctorium, you'd potentially use this in an absolute beginner group so that you can activate the major maim during the jumps and during the heavens to kind of reduce the damage so that damage dealers don't die. So that is potentially an option. Again, the problem you got with this one is it comes from Castle Thorn, and that's quite tricky to do on Vet, and I don't think it's as accessible as Encratis and as Tremor Scale and all the other monster sets. Like, this is less accessible for little benefit. Like, it's got very little benefit, so it's kind of an option. Ad pulls maybe. Like I say, it's a good option maybe for ad pulls just to reduce that damage, especially things that do AoE attacks and big hits and jumps and dives and all that kind of stuff. Lord Warden, this is a decent like starter set, a decent beginner set. If you don't have trouble sustaining or surviving, then you could go with this one, and this is kind of helpful for the group as well. Potentially even somewhere near on par with Ladythorne. So Ladythorne reduces damage by 10%. Lord Warden will increase resistances by 3,180 for all the group members. So Lord Warden's kind of providing reduced damage as well, but in the term of buffing people's resistances. So in situations where people are lower on resistances, you could proc this in group, and that means they'll take less damage, which is quite helpful in some content, especially this patch, especially for low CP groups. So if you've got people that are quite low on champion points and they don't have the option of slotting mitigation CP, then obviously this is going to be quite helpful. But I mean, you're going to want to try and get group buff sets as a priority over this kind of thing. But if your group does struggle with staying alive and they want something that's a survival based set, then Lord Warden is obviously going to be a good pick. So Ladythorne, Lord Warden, probably your top 2 picks in terms of like reducing damage and improving survival of your group. Malabeth, this has got a couple of uses. It kind of gives you a heal and it's got a chance to proc Major Vitality. The only real place I personally use this is in Kind's Aegis hard mode. It's not really super useful anywhere else. Like, you could use it, but you get a better benefit from using Earth Gore typically and things like that. But this is good for Foulgrave and hard mode because you'll have quite a lot of high health. You'll have a really high health pool for that fight. And that means it's quite difficult for the healers to heal you because your health is going up and down like a yo-yo, like crazy. It's going crazy. So by having the Major Vitality procs, that means that it's easier for your healers to heal you. It requires less resources for them so they can sustain the fight, and you can sustain the fight, and it's a bit easier to not die. So it will help for really high damage situations. It's worth having it and just kind of using it when that situation arises, so it can help when you've got a really high health pool. You take lots of damage and big damage hits quite frequently, and it makes it easier for your healers. More of the Infernal, obviously great tank set. Not really. Next one. We've got Sentinel of Rakugom. This is kind of a group-based sustain set. Not really necessary this patch. If you struggle to get Engine Guardian and you don't have the people to do Darkshade 2, you could get this one instead from Darkshade 1, which is a lot easier than Darkshade 2. It provides less sustain, however. It is kind of a group sustain set, so you can proc it on your group, but typically, if you use this on a main tank and you don't have something that heals your group, then it's just going to proc on you, and it's going to heal you and give you resources back. So, I mean, it is an option for a self-sustain set, which could double up as a group sustain set as well, if you want it to, and if you can, but it's not as good as other sets that are available. There's no real reason to use it. This patch sustain's quite good, especially considering you're only going to get 125 magicka and stamina back every 1 second for 8 seconds. It's not very much. Like, it's not game changing. It's not really going to make that much difference, but it will help a little bit. So if you're in stacked fights and you want to help your group, you can use it. If you need a sustain set, you can't get Engine Guardian, then you can use this as well. Stonekeeper, we're not going to really look at. It's not that good. It's very difficult to proc. We've mentioned this in the past before, but it just takes so long to proc this monster set. It's not as worth as using compared to Grundwolf, compared to all that kind of, like, compared to Engine Guardian. It's not as worth it to use Stonekeeper. It just takes far too long to proc. So it's like you can be sitting there for 45 seconds. I think I've timed it once where there was no proc, and it just takes forever. So it's not worth using. You can't rely on the sustain from it, and it just takes too long. And especially the amount of sustain you get back from it as well, like 2,480 stamina and magicka, is so little for the amount of time you've got to wait for it. It's just not really worth it. Swarm Mother, not really a lot of use for this, but if you run something like a Templar tank or a Nightblade tank, where you don't want to use, you don't have a chain in dungeon content, you could just use your range taunt, spam range taunt and everything, and then let Swarm Mother pull everything in. So this is kind of a way to chain things in without spending stamina on certain classes that have to use Silver Leash. So you could just use, like I say, you could just use Swarm Mother, and then let it do its thing, just range taunt everything. So it'd be the same as, like, your range taunt's quite cheap. So like chains on a DK is about 4k magicka. Using a range taunt is nearly half that. So you could just go, boom, range taunt, range taunt, range taunt, block. It pulls everything in automatically, nice and easy. So that is a good way to kind of maybe do dungeons as a beginner, because this is quite easy to obtain as well. It's not too difficult to get a Swarm Mother. And yeah, it just pulls everything in, nice and helpful. Get it from Spindle Clutch 1, job done. It's also quite good on Yolnahkrin in VSS when you're first going in there for the first time. it can be difficult to chain those adds under because you can end up chaining the head of the boss or the wing. You can chain things incorrectly. Sometimes it can be difficult if you don't know how to do it. But if you range taunt the 2 fire action arcs in Yolnahquin hard mode, roll underneath the boss, and then block, it will just chain them in automatically, and it saves you a bit of a job. And you can kind of get used to the damage under the boss and the positioning and all that kind of stuff. And then worry about actually chaining them later and using a more useful monster set. Symphony of Blades is another decent monster set, but not really. You don't really use this on a tank. Like, you get it from Depths of Malatar, another tricky dungeon, and it's not really for much benefit. So this is commonly used by a healer because a healer has the opportunity to heavy attack and not die, compared to a tank. If you are using this, you cannot proc it on yourself. You can only proc it on the other people in your group, and it says it. When you heal an ally who is under 50% of their primary resource, you grant them Madeiras Favor, which restores magic and stamina every second for 6 seconds and can occur every 18 seconds. So you need one person in every group to be using this, and you typically don't want it to be your tank or your tanks because your tanks will have to block damage where they're going to be losing resources. You've got to have the option of that proc on a tank. Like, you wouldn't use it as a DK tank who's trying to keep up stagger, because you want this to proc on you. You don't want to be proccing this on other people. You've also got to be healing people, and Blood Altar doesn't work anymore. So you're going to have to use like healing orbs or something like that, or a healing skill. So you're not going to get the benefit of this yourself, which seems a bit crazy, because you're going to really, really need it on a tank for a lot of situations. Even as the off tank, if you're spamming Powerful Assault and Empowering Grasp and using MK and things like that, like, you don't want to be having to proc. You don't want to have to proc this on people. It's not going to be of much benefit to you to use it. So this is more of a healer set, but in certain situations you might use it on a tank. So I have used this in the past on a Templar tank, because a Templar tank can put down Extended Ritual and then it'll just proc. So I think I've used it in Vicosa with Extended Ritual. So I put Extended Ritual on the group, and then I was kiting the adds around on the second boss, for example, and it just meant that, like, the Symphony was proccing on the group, and I wasn't even have to do anything. I just used to put Ritual down and then kite the adds around the room, and it would just proc Symphony on all the group. And then the same on last boss on Vicosa as well. Like, you're not really doing anything as the Vicosa last boss. Off tank, you're just standing on the wall. When the boss goes, you taunt some adds and jump down. So you don't really need the sustain. Whereas the healer can benefit from other sets, you can use that, and then there you go. But in most cases, you wouldn't use this on a tank, because you're trying to push like up times, and you're using a lot of resources from blocking and rolling and all that kind of stuff. So you wouldn't want to have to then not get the benefit of using this on yourself. The Vulcan is not a good set at all. This is a bad monster set, a very bad monster set. It gives 5% reduced damage. It's got a really high downtime, so it basically procs for 8 seconds. And then it lasts for 4 seconds after, and then it's got a 16-second downtime. So what can happen is, if you get hit before you're in the position that you want to be to proc it, it could proc somewhere different, and then you've got to wait 16 seconds before you can proc it again, which is too late. So if you walk into a fight and something hits you, it will proc. But if you're stacking it on the other side of the room, it's already too late. You've wasted the proc because that's at the entrance. You also don't need the Vulcan, because the Vulcan is minor main, and you get minor main from so many other sources now. You just don't need it. For ad pulls, I personally use Frozen Watcher, and I use that a lot now. Ad pulls, we have like Frozen Watcher, we have Defiled Dragon, Incratis, we have Alkosh, Yolnahquin, Ladythorne. We've got all that kind of stuff going on already. Now, Frozen Watcher causes the chilled effect as an AoE. So every enemy that gets hit by Frozen Watcher gets the chilled effect applied to them. The chilled effect applies minor main, which is the same as the Vulcan. And using Frozen Watcher is like 100 times more reliable than using the Vulcan as well. But not only that, by using Frozen Watcher, you get AoE minor brittle, which increases the damage the enemies take. 10% more crit damage. So you're better off using Frozen Watcher in ad pulls than you are to use the Vulcan, because you'll get more benefits, you'll get extra stuff. You'll still do the AoE minor main, but you'll get more reliability, more precision on where it's proccing, and you'll get other debuffs and buffs as well by doing it. And so yeah, I just think the Vulcan's a really, really poor choice of monster set. And it's for 5% reduced damage, it is just not really worth it. Like 5% reduced damage is hardly anything. It's got no value whatsoever anymore. It used to be quite decent. But you can also just use a minor maim skill. You can use Talons on a DK. Even if you don't actually Talons the enemy, just by using it, that causes minor maim. Dark Shade on a Nightblade. The Dark Shade does a spin attack where it causes AoE minor maim. So there are, like, most classes have some kind of minor maim that's built into their kind of skills as an AoE effect. So you just don't need this monster set whatsoever. Tremor Scale. So if you're looking for a damage buffing set, you've got in Crisis' Behemoth for Magicka groups. You would use that. And then for stamina groups, you've got Tremor Scale. So Tremor Scale is the only set worth using in stamina groups. If you've got a mixed group of stamina and Magicka, you'd have the main tank in Tremor Scale and the off tank in Kratis. So you'd use both. But in general, like if you're trying to buff your group's damage, then you would need Tremor Scale for a stamina based group, or if there's any stamina DDs. The stamina DDs absolutely need the physical the physical resistance reducing effect of this. If you don't use this in a stamina group, they are nowhere near the pen cap, and so they are losing an absolute ton of damage. You are making the DDs do a lot less damage by not using this. So this is a must-have set if you've got stamina DDs in your group. If you've got a mixed group or a stamina group, this is a must-have set, and you've got to use it. It's a group buff set. Obviously, if you don't need sustain, you don't need a heal, you don't need other stuff, this is the one you go with to buff your group. It's the only stamina-based buffing monster set that's worth using. Troll King, not really worth using anymore. And then we got Vicosa. So this is more of a precision-based monster set. I've done a video on this before. Nothing's changed with it for this patch. You apply Major Cowardice to the enemy and reduces their weapon and spell damage. It's not as good as Ladythorne, but it's got a couple of seconds higher uptime. So you can potentially use it. My big issue with it as well is not only is it not as good as Ladythorne, but I also accidentally use this far more often. So I accidentally bash the enemy quite often, and then I waste the proc of this monster set. Because when I'm bar swapping and I'm pressing skills and I'm blocking and then I'm not blocking, so I don't palm a block, I'm taking my finger off block and I'm pressing buttons and I'm dodge rolling. I'm like pressing buttons quite often. I use a controller. I will accidentally bash quite a lot of the time. So it just won't be of use. So that's it for monster sets. Mythic items. Quickly go through mythic items. If you're not, you can decide not to use a monster set. Like I wouldn't say it's not worth it for this patch. Flames of Ambition patch. It's not worth dropping the monster set for the main tank at least, because you need to use Krasis. You need to use Tremor Scale. If you're having trouble with sustain, you obviously need Engine Guardian. If you're struggling to stay alive, you need Earth Gore. If your group's struggling to stay alive, you're using Ladythorne or using Lord Warden. So there's not really many opportunities to really drop your monster set anymore. What you do want to do is on the off tank, there's potential to drop monster set if you can. Bloodlord's Embrace. A lot of people still ask about this, and I don't think people actually quite understand how it works. So you have to bash one enemy, and you apply the effect to them, the Blood Curse. And then every time they hit you, you'll gain 1,535 Magicka back. And it can occur every 1 second, but no enemy hits every 1 second. So enemies hit every 2, 3, 4, 5, even like more. So let's say St. Olms, for example. It'll light attack you and it'll take 5 seconds to hit the next light attack. But then it might go through a phase where it does the spit, and then the heavens, and then the cone, and then the kite, and then something else. So you can't actually be waiting 30 seconds to get hit. That means that you're not going to get the proc of this. So this, because it's only a single target thing, you've got to apply it to one enemy, and then they've got to hit you to gain that Magicka back. It's not really that effective. The only time I can see it being potentially useful is if you're running like a double Frost build and you're using the Trifocus passive, you're struggling for sustain, you should be using balance for a start. But if that's not working and you really can't cope, then you could potentially use this. But I mean, I wouldn't personally ever do that, because I would much rather be using a monster set that's going to help my group rather than using a double frost build and then having to rely on a set like this. This just isn't really that great. And like I say, for this set to be good, you need the enemy to hit you every second, basically, or else it's not really that good. The other stuff, not really. Band of Brutality, no. Wild Hunt. Ring of the Wild Hunt can have some minor uses for like ad pulls. You could use it to speed through. You could use it if you really wanted to on some things. I mean, I'd rather be using, like I said, I'd rather use a monster set than have the speed boost from that. The Talk of Tonal Constancy. So this has, again, some minor effects. So let's say you're trying to maintain a lot of debuffs on an off-tank. So on an off-tank, you don't potentially need to use a monster set if the main tank's got it covered. You could use this. Let's say you're trying to keep up PA and Empowering Grasp and you use an MK as well, but then using MK and then your stamina's too low to then use PA, but then you spammed all your Magicka on Empowering Grasp on a Necro. This could be a way to kind of balance that out. So you could still smash down your stamina, and then you're going to get your Magicka back, because you're going to get Magicka recovery when your stamina's low. And then when your Magicka's low, you're going to get stam recovery. So this is a kind of a good way, potentially, to manage that if you're not using another mythic item we're going to talk about in a second. If you're really having a hard time to maintain a certain number of like buff sets and stuff that you might be using in a decent group, then this is a good one that you could potentially use, because you are dropping your stamina down for like MK. If you're using martial knowledge on a tank, it can be a bit risky. So if you are doing that, then your stamina drops low, but you get loads of Magicka recovery. So as soon as you've procced MK, you can then spam Igneous Shields, and that'll give you your stamina back, for example. So it kind of has that function that you can make use of, and it's going to be decent for kind of getting through some of those things. So it has potential for certain situations, but not like a super useful thing. I've seen some people use this in Sunspire hard mode as well for the off tank on the last boss. So when you're trying to take the statues, you've got 3, 2, 3, 4 statues maybe even sometimes, and you're trying to manage interrupts, you're trying to manage sprinting, you're trying to manage blocking, you're trying to manage running about and all that. Like, I can see why that would be useful for that. So potentially for that as well. So that is something that might be worth getting. This is a good one. This is a really good one. The Pearls of Elnife. This is a very good mythic item. It doesn't have a cooldown, so whenever you cast a healing ability while in combat and your dominant resource is under 30%, you gain 5 ultimate. So this is quite easy for an off tank, because what you can do, let's say you're in a fight as an off tank where you're not really doing much tanking, like, I don't know, VMOL. So more of Lorcage, the first boss, all you're doing is kind of standing there and buffing and debuffing. So you've got the Pearls of Elnife. You spam your resources down to under 30%. You could be using martial knowledge with this as well. MK, Pearls of Elnife, and PA as a combination, for me, seems like a fantastic idea. So you're using PA, you're spamming your PA, that takes your stamina low, you proc your MK, and then you're using another heal, like it might be a Magicka-based heal. On a Necro, this works amazing, and you're getting 5 ultimate. So if you're using like Necrotic Potency on a Necro, it's free. And it's a Magicka, like, it's going to consume the corpses, which heals you, and then that's going to proc this. And this doesn't have a cooldown. You can proc this every single second. Every time you press your heal button, you'll get 5 ultimate back, as long as you're under 30% stamina. So this is an absolutely unbelievable monster. If you know how to use it, and you're in a trial situation where you can use it effectively, you can be spamming ultimates out for fun. Like, you'll be getting double, if not triple, the amount of ultimate of everybody else in your group by using this, if you use it in the correct way and you know how to manage it and play with it and use that kind of stuff. It's a fantastic way of building ultimate really quickly and improving your group's kind of damage via Warhorns and Colossuses and things. So yeah, definitely, if you can, pick up the Pearls of Elnife. This is definitely worth farming, definitely worth getting. If you play as the off tank, absolutely 100% get this. And it's a good one. So that is pretty much everything for monster sets for this patch, guys. For the Flames of Ambition DLC, that is pretty much everything you need to know about the monster sets. So just to kind of recap, the best monster sets are if you need to sustain Engine Guardian or potentially Grundwolf. If you struggle for incoming heals because your healer's not healing you or you're not very good at healing yourself, use Earthgore. If you want to use a group buff set, for a Magicka group using Kratos' Behemoth. If you're in a Stamina group, you would use Tremor Scale. If your group's struggling to stay alive and they die a lot, and you want to increase survivability, then you use Ladythorne. Or, if you can be inside the group to proc this, Lord Warden. If you are an off-tank and you don't need to use a monster set, you got everything covered, then you would potentially use the Pearls of Elnife. They are like the best thing aside from a monster set. So those are kind of all of your options for this patch, guys.